Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Welcome to the stage.
Thanks.
Yeah. So let's back. So why don't you tell people? Let's go here. What does Director of Alliance of Angels kind of look like? What's day to day? Right, and then we'll get back into like how did you get here? But kind of first tell us what you do, and then we'll kind of dig into the history from there.
Well, the Alliance of Angels is the largest angel group north of San Francisco. And we were started almost 20 years ago now by none other than Bill Gates Sr., not Junior, but Senior. And he was having a lunch with some friends, and they were talking about how Seattle is this big tech center and has essentially a God-given right to be a tech center.
God-given.
And he said, wait a second, you're crazy. It doesn't. He said, the only reason Boeing is here is by accident of birth. Bill Boeing was his client. He was the lawyer for Boeing. And he said, he was born here. That's where he formed his company. And the only reason Microsoft is here is Bill Jr. got homesick in Albuquerque and decided to move back to Seattle. Otherwise, Albuquerque would be the tech center. Not the home of Breaking Bad. But when he started thinking about all of his colleagues who felt like Seattle had this sort of right to be a tech center, he said it could go away as quickly as it came. So he said to himself, what are the things we need to do to make Seattle remain vibrant as a tech center? And education, of course, was number one. But he realized at the time that startup capital was severely limited in this city compared to other places. And so he got 87 of his friends to get together and form this organization, which is the Alliance of Angels, to help startups get going, get financed, and thrive. And it's based on a number of different principles. First and foremost, there is the capital. And on any given year, the Alliance of Angels invests about $10 million in about 20 to 25 local startups. We focus entirely on the Pacific Northwest. I personally believe that if somebody is coming to Seattle from San Francisco looking for money, there has to be a reason, and I don't know what it is. And so, sometimes people will come from San Francisco and say, look, my friend down there, so-and-so, is your good friend, and he said, you really have the knowledge to help us, will you work with us? That's a different scenario. But most of the time, most angel deals are financed first where they live. The second thing, besides money, is experience and help. There are a lot of people in this community who've had great careers. They've learned so much. They have so many contacts they've nurtured through years. And they want to be able to help the next generation of entrepreneurs be successful. And, we want to give back. Because frankly, if you only wanted to make money, being an angel investor is not necessarily the best way to make money. And then lastly, we looked at a lot of people struggling to get financing, and they worked so long for so hard. We wanted to make it an efficient process. Not just for the entrepreneurs coming through, but also for our members. We want to make it easy to do these angel investments in these great companies. So we struggled to find a way to do that. And what we do is we do a monthly cycle, and we bring entrepreneurs through, find the ones that are most likely to attract our members, bring them in, and it's probably the only place in the Pacific Northwest, at least, where an entrepreneur can spend 15 minutes and reach 80 active angel investors, and do that on a routine basis. So we're pretty proud of the program we've had. We've invested in about 200 startups since inception. We've had like 35 exits, 20% IRR for our members, which is pretty good considering. Been alive through up cycles, down cycles, up cycles, down cycles. We recognize what it takes to survive the cyclical nature of this business. But on a day-to-day basis, We run companies through this process. We advise them, we help them. Each one of our members tends to pick the deals they really like and focus on them. Now, I bet there's a little statistic probably most of you who are entrepreneurs don't know. If you're an investor and looking at a new deal, data has been collected that tries to look for correlations, because, you know, correlations are a good thing, right? You want to sort of know
Sometimes.
what would correlate with being a successful company. And they looked at a bunch of things. Anybody want to guess what the #1 correlation for an angel investor is on a successful outcome? Anybody who knows the answer can't say. Who wants to guess? Oh, come on, you can't be that quiet. You must have.
What do you guys think? A guess?
Yes. Clearly, they have a woman on the team.
Oh, that's a good
diversity.
guess.
There you go. I like it.
Turns out that's not the answer, but that's a good guess.
Repeat entrepreneur or experienced entrepreneur?
Somewhat, but that doesn't correlate either. We also thought, well, big market. Maybe that correlates. Not entirely.
Really solid research.
I'm sorry?
Solid research?
Solid research in the company, so they understand the market and other things. That doesn't correlate either.
The execution?
It turns out it's much more simple than any of this.
Team?
No. The one thing, no, well, all these things are necessary for a good deal.
Who help, like, basically know the pain in the market?
All those things are necessary for a good deal. The correlative factor that angels have found is the one predictor is diligence. It turns out that an angel who does zero diligence and invests in a deal is much more likely to roll a bunch of zeros. And an angel who does 20 hours or more of diligence, or any investor who does 20 hours or more of due diligence, statistically has a better outcome. Now, when I first heard this, I doubted it. Because you tend to fall in love with companies and then invest in the ones you fall in love with. But it turns out that investing in a group where you share the diligence among a lot of people is a really good thing, because you can get to that 20-hour mark if it's split among 5 people by only doing 4 hours of diligence. Now, from an entrepreneur's point of view, you go, oh God, I don't want to have to deal with these stupid questions. But what we find very often is that diligence process is the one time when an entrepreneur truly listens to their investors, takes their input into effect, and it modifies plans of companies. And you can avoid making a ton of mistakes very early on in your company. And it also turns out that companies that make a lot of mistakes at the beginning and have to pivot a lot and burn through their cash are more likely than not to fail. So the diligence has a double-edged positive effect. And so one of the reasons that we really like investing as a group is I probably see 20 new deals a month, personally. How many can I possibly really look at if I'm going to spend 20 hours on each deal? I can't look at that many. So working as a group, we have the ability to do this diligence in a very concise and consolidated way as a group that's friendly toward entrepreneurs, that doesn't focus on all the wrong things, but hopefully focuses on the things that are critical to making the business successful, and fund those deals.
So diligence, #1 piece, right? So for founders who haven't been through that, give me some ideas about what are the questions and the diligence process that they would need to go through or kind of be prepared for that you look for in the Alliance of Angels.
So it's different for every company. There
Sure.
are people who say, here is my diligence package, it's 80 pages, fill it out. And frankly, 70 of those pages are probably irrelevant to the company you have. So I don't like formulaic approaches, but there are some things that are always, always true. #1 is the team. You want to diligence the team. You want to make reference calls, not only to the 3 names they give you, but hopefully to a couple names that you found. Go on LinkedIn, find out who they worked with, call up somebody who wasn't on their list and find out what it's like to work with them.
Right.
I've actually some very interesting things almost always happen when you do this. You call up somebody who wasn't on their list, who you found out worked for them at their previous company, but didn't come to this company with them. And you get a bunch of feedback about what they're like as a leader. And a lot of times when you find those things out, if you're going on their board in particular, it can be really valuable to help guide them through some of the transitions that every startup company goes through. The second thing that you almost always want to do is find somebody who is a customer who's used the product or service. Because then you try to get candid information, and it also helps the investors then hook the company up with other similar customers. Another thing you look at is market, but probably once you get your company funded and it's going and you have an angel as a board member, one of the roles that the angel really should take on for the CEO, a friend of mine from Ohio, John Houston, founded this term, is the angel investor should be the chief acquisition officer for the company. Because I invest in a young CEO doing a startup. I want them to focus on growing their business, executing their plan, shipping their product, talking to customers, becoming prominent in the industry, all the things you have to do to execute that business plan. I don't want them spending any time thinking about how to get acquired. That's going to come later. The problem is, if nobody thinks about this until it's time to get acquired, that's like all of a sudden having somebody hit you upside the head with a sledgehammer when you get your acquisition offer and figuring out, does it make sense? So you want somebody figuring out, are you doing the right things to get acquired? Let me use an example.
Do you think that's an overall arching, a lot of people believe that that's that first job of that angel as you give the example, and
No.
where that role is, why you think that role is so important as you give the example?
No, it's a long-term job.
Yeah.
It's not a short-term. Short-term is making sure the cash is spent wisely, making sure the company doesn't run out of cash, making sure that the CEO, if they need help or mentoring, gets it effectively on time, making sure that the hires are good. All the things you need to run a company are the first job. But the reason the acquisition piece becomes important is a lot of times, look, the definition of a startup is it has limited resources. No startup ever has all the resources they do, and I'm famous for a phrase, I don't remember how I came up with it. More startups die of indigestion than starvation.
So true.
You don't starve to death. You come up with too many ideas, you spend your money on the wrong things, you run out of cash, then all of a sudden you're dead. And startups run out of cash. They don't run out of opportunity, they don't run out of product, they don't run out of people, they run out of cash. That's how they die. And I remember once I was on the board of the company, and I was taking my mental role as chief acquisition officer seriously. And the company was about to do another round to acquire its next 50,000 customers. Seemed like a good objective. But then I stepped back and said, and after we acquire these, what happens? Well, then the acquisition offers begin to come in. And who are the acquiring companies? It turns out they're all people who don't need more customers. They already have the customers. They need a better product. Were we investing in the right thing to build up sales and marketing to acquire all these new customers? No.
No.
What we really needed to do was solidify our position with the ones we have, expand our product, expand our market reach into other places, go internationally potentially, and spend more money on branding, not on customer acquisition.
Right,
so
really,
we wound up not doing that, and the company got acquired for a good multiple.
So you're talking about traction, right? And sometimes traction is product, sometimes traction is customers. Like, how do you help a company figure out, like, where are you going to put those scarce resources in what they're doing?
Experience.
Yeah.
I mean, I have gray hair for a reason. And it's not from doing everything right through my career. It's from the mistakes that I've made, and hopefully you learn from them.
So let's take that gray hair and like back it all the way up, right? When you were growing up, what did you want to be? How did you get to be in this chair, right? What's a little bit of that in a nutshell about how Dan got to be Alliance of Angels?
I'm fond of saying I'm a guy who can't hold a job.
Unemployable.
Because I tend to switch jobs with regularity. You know, I go do something, I get it to a certain point, and it's time to move on and do something else. I was talking earlier, mentioning dogs. I was on the board of the Humane Society.
Because you have a pup too, right? Your
I
dog
did, yeah.
is...
She was a rescue.
Oh, awesome.
And I was famous around Seattle for bringing my dog everywhere with me. She would come to meetings and sit in the chair next to me. I take her to board meetings. In fact, does the name Vince Cerf mean anything to anybody in the room? Vince is the guy who invented the internet, Turing Award Presidential Medal of Freedom. And Vint was on a board with me, and I brought my dog to the meeting. And Vint, for those that don't know him, is a very prim and proper guy, always wears a three-piece suit, dresses very well, seems very formidable. And he comes into this board meeting, and I'm sitting in a seat, my dog is next to me, and he takes the seat next to the dog. And I'm worried, because I didn't know him that well at the time. And he turns and looks at me and he says, Dan, I have to thank you. And I said, why? And he said, well, I've been on multi-gender boards, I've been on multi-ethnic boards, I've been on multi-racial boards, I've been on multi-nationality boards. This is my first multi-species board.
Women and dogs, that's what it is, women and dogs, right? There you go, yes. Yeah.
And, but so I tend to do things for a period of time and then move on and do something else. So I started as
Were you
a
entrepreneurial growing up?
research scientist.
Really?
And
Right.
got a PhD in biophysics, but while I was an undergrad, I I decided I wanted to learn computers. I was a biologist who wanted to learn computers. No biologists learned computers back then. And so I walked into the computer center and was ogling the machine, and two guys came up and said, hey, you want to learn about this? And yes. Turns out, as an undergrad, I also became an expert programmer. And was talking to a professor one day, and he said, my grad students spend 1 month collecting data and 3 months analyzing it. And I said, why don't you write a program to do that? He said, how would you do that? And I said, I can do it for you. And he said, what will you charge? And I said, $1,000. And he said, done. And it was really pretty simple. And I wrote the program, turned it over to him, and the lab next door called me up and said, we really need the same program. Can you sell it to us too? And I said, $2,000. I'm a good entrepreneur.
Entrepreneurship right there, there we go, sales.
And it needed some customization, so I hired a little local high school student who was hanging around the computer center, and I paid him to make the modifications. And I wound up selling it 3 more times before I graduated. And so that was my first startup business. And then went to grad school, but at the end of grad school, I was in California, UCSD, and California passed Proposition 13, which limited the budget of the state at the time, and so it was very hard to get a tenured position any place in California.
So you thought you wanted to teach?
I thought, I mean, you're a researcher, you go on and keep doing research, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And this opportunity came to go to Bell Labs. So I left California to go to Bell Labs for 2 years to get my industrial stamped and move on and do more research. And lo and behold, I get to Bell Labs, they discover I can speak to customers and not embarrass them. No researchers can speak to customers and not embarrass us.
Code? That's a crazy skill set.
So I wound up doing that, and the next thing I knew, I was living in Europe, running the European division of AT&T International. And spent 7 years outside the US, came back, and AT&T said, you've gone native, you have to do a domestic job for a while. And I said, you know, there's this new thing called the internet that fascinates me. So they let me set up this group called Consumer Interactive Services. And wound up being one of the first things that was really big on the internet. And after doing that for a number of years, I guess about 6, that seems to be my magic number, Microsoft courted me. Nathan Marable wanted me to come work for him. So I came to Microsoft, did that for 6 years. Don't hold this against me. I was the first general manager of search at Microsoft. I started the search market.
right? There's a lot you did at Microsoft, right?
I did
There's
a
like
lot.
this, like maybe a little.
Pushing Netscape single-handedly.
Well, yeah, can we talk a
If
little bit
everybody-
about those days? Because that's not something just be slid over, right? There was some really,
That was a long time ago.
and still, we've got a little bit of time. Can you give us a little bit, like,
Sure.
like that early, right? When you think about search before what we know of search being search, right? And Internet Explorer and some of those things, like what was, what was that? What was
So
those
one
lessons?
of the things that I don't have any reason to have a skill in, but seem to be good at, is getting deals done. And I did that a lot at AT&T. And then I get to Microsoft, and for a couple of years, I was actually called Bill's Deal Guy.
So a little context for a minute, like, so how big was Microsoft when you were there? Like, where were they at? Right? And that was what year? Would you, like,
I
just so you kind of
joined
get
in
that.
'94 and left in 2000. I was there
Okay.
6 years.
Okay.
So remember, before Windows 95
Yeah.
shipped,
Yeah.
MSN was supposed to compete with AOL.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they brought me in to make MSN into an internet service because Bill had decided that the internet was going to be the next big thing. And so I cut a number of deals for Microsoft, and the reason I got
And you agreed with that, right? You thought that too.
I
Because you
agreed.
saw that early, right?
Oh,
yeah.
I completely agreed.
Yep.
And I had built AT&T's TCP network, and Microsoft was using an X25 network, so I got them over onto TCP/IP. I backed the company that they used for that, joined their board, was the really first big internet IPO, and then wound up doing a number of other things like that while running a group that we called MSN Services that was going to do search and a number of other things.
Question.
Yeah, I was just wondering, why do you think you were good at making deals? Or do you get that?
Yeah, I at least I used to be. I don't know if I still am.
Sure.
Probably still am. And it comes down to listening to people. A lot of times people go into deals thinking they know what the other party wants.
Right.
And then at one point, AT&T actually, being a young guy who's a researcher, they sent me off to a class. And I remember the guy who taught the class was considered one of the best deal makers of that era.
Donald Trump.
And he said, the trick of doing a good deal is, the art of the deal.
Just kidding.
The trick of doing a good deal is to care but not care too much. You can never walk into a deal that you can't walk away from if you're ever going to get it done. And I mean, there's probably a degree of bluffing in it, but at the end, deals get done when people develop a personal relationship and they want to get the deal done together. At least successful deals. I never like deals that are win-lose. They have to be win-win. You got to figure out how to do it.
Do you look for that same skill set in the founders of the companies that you invest in, whether it be through Alliance of Angels or the fund that you run, right? So there's things outside of.
No, I typically invest primarily through the Alliance of Angels.
Okay.
In the last 25 years, I've done probably about 100 deals. My current portfolio, active portfolio, is about 60.
Yeah.
And that's a complex spreadsheet. I can't keep track of all of them. But what I tend to do is I do look for win-wins. What I look for most in a company these days is I want to work with an entrepreneur that I like working with. Life's too short to work with an asshole.
So what about,
And-
so
and,
when you say
you know-
entrepreneur, like what about some specific characteristics that you look for in a founder, right, that you think are important in that? And obviously there's team and all kinds of other things about that, but when you're looking at, right, again, value around human beings and good humans in Startup Grind, what are some of those things that you look for in a founder that, like, I want to work with this guy and that's going to make it enjoyable for me?
Well, I would say guy or girl.
Yes, absolutely.
Um,
I say founder as,
I
right,
very
there's no
often-
gender in founder.
I'd
Yeah,
say
great.
a large portion of the CEOs I've worked with in the last 5 years have been women.
Okay.
And it's, not just the way it works out.
And why? What do you
But
think that is? What
I
is that
think-
characteristic that you
I
think
think
maybe
the
comes through more?
things I look for, I like people who are wicked smart. Because being really smart is an important thing. On the other hand, there are people who are actually so smart that they can see every side of every issue and they get paralyzed from being able to make a decision. So I like people who recognize the fact that it's really important to make quick decisions and move a business forward. And recognize quickly when you've made the wrong decision. So let me contrast that to, and I like people who are strategic in their thinking, who are looking several steps ahead, not just at what's happening tomorrow. The problem is that sometimes people who are really smart and really strategic develop a syndrome that I call, if it's Thursday, the strategy must be exit. That means that every Thursday I get a phone call from the CEO who says, this week we learned this. Therefore, we have to morph our strategy to be that. That's not a good idea. Don't stick with a really bad strategy, but don't be so quick to adopt the latest thing that crossed your plate and say that's our new strategy. Because when you do that, you never deliver anything. You're constantly in flux between different things. So spend a bunch of time thinking about what the right strategy for your company is. Surround yourself with great advisors. And this is one of the most important features that I look for in a CEO. Somebody who's willing to listen and learn. Look, if you're going to be an entrepreneur and do your own startup, you're going to have a big ego. You should. Big egos are a good thing. You know how smart you are. You know how successful you want to be. You've been successful in the past, and you're bringing it to this new venture. God bless it. I mean, I think I've often said any rational person wouldn't be an entrepreneur. It's too hard to do. I mean, if you can go get paid $300,000 a year at Facebook or Microsoft or Google, most people would just rather do that. It's a lot less work than being an entrepreneur and having no salary for a while and then earning a small salary. People become entrepreneurs and do startups because they have a passion to create something new and bring something to the world that just hasn't happened before. They see a path that nobody else has seen. That's really important. But you have to temper that just a little bit with listening skills. A great entrepreneur knows how to listen. They know how to hire people in specific areas who are smarter than they are, and then listen to them. I mean, I have one entrepreneur I've worked with for a while who's so smart and probably will wind up, I hope, because I put some money in it, have a successful outcome for his company.
Yeah.
But at the beginning, I said to him, you really don't understand marketing. And at the end of the day, as good as your product is, and as much as you integrate with a bunch of partners, you're going to have to figure out how to market your product. And I said, you got to hire somebody who's really smart in marketing. And the first person he hired lasted 1 month. The second person he hired lasted 2 weeks. And I realized we had a problem here because, he has a weakness, he's blind to it, and he has a lot of trouble listening to people who are really good at it. So for me, one of the really important skills I look for is somebody who knows how to listen to their advisors. Doesn't mean you have to take everybody's advice as gospel. You should be judicious about it, but at least listen to it.
So those are the characteristics. We left off at Microsoft, right? So you were still employed, right? Playing browser and search. How did you make the transition from employee to angel investor, and how did those characteristics in a founder or a company you're going to invest in, how did those manifest, or where did you see those over and over, the successful ones that that's what I want to invest in?
So I started investing before I left Microsoft, before I joined Microsoft, actually.
So
invested in a bunch of angel deals.
94 to
Microsoft.
2000, and then now you're investing in late 90s?
In the late 90s, well, actually even in the early 90s. So
Okay.
for example, when we founded the Alliance of Angels in '87, and I was sitting next to a friend of mine at the first meeting, and he asked if I'd looked at a little local Seattle startup that had about 10 employees. And he told me he had just committed the first $100,000 to this startup and asked if I could do it. And at the time I said, oh, I have a conflict. I'm running Microsoft's e-commerce group, so I can't invest in Amazon. Not the biggest mistake I've ever made,
No.
but close.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
And so in 2000, I'd sort of been at Microsoft long enough. and was getting a little frustrated with the politics. And it wasn't so much, it was watching the things that Microsoft should have been doing that I couldn't convince them to do. For good business reasons, but bad strategic reasons. So I decided that I really like doing deals, and so I'd leave and start a venture capital firm. And I started one called Fraser Technology Ventures with Alan Fraser. And he had a biotech investment firm that still exists. It's the largest in Seattle doing biotech. And he wanted to put a tech firm in because it was the late 90s. Tech was hot. Biotech wasn't so hot. Come join me, come do this. Probably not a great decision because we closed the fund in May of 2000, which was absolutely the worst period ever in the history of venture capital funds to start a venture capital fund. And our first fund, which we thought we'd raise about $150 million for and do early stage startups, we raised $50 million by sheer force of will. And I'm pleased to say that that vintage fund, the top quartile, the top 25% of the funds, returned 75% of capital. We returned 110% of capital, which put us in the top decile. Didn't make me any money at all. But I was pleased that we got our investors their money back.
I guess a question on that. So you go from, if I hear this correctly, you go from an employee at Microsoft to venture capital fund with never being a founder yourself. Is that right?
No, I co-founded a couple companies.
Okay. And then in that, then what was the lead that was it your deal making history where I think I can see a good company? Like what gave you the confidence, Dan, to be an angel investor? Say I think I can spot a good deal or a good company given your background. How did that happen?
What makes a good investor is the question.
Yes, sure, absolutely. And what makes you a good investor specifically?
Well, I would answer what makes anybody a good investor.
Fair enough.
And you know, there's a measure of luck.
Okay, yeah.
But there's also the ability to see some technology trends and recognize them early enough. There's the ability to recognize founders who you really want to be affiliated and associated with. But also there's a lot about structures of deals, about exits and other things that really help. But probably
is that the
equally
education
important,
piece that you just had to learn?
an education piece, but also there's the question of what supports a startup besides the team itself? It's the board. The CEO reports to the board. This is only relevant after you've taken outside money. But the moment you've taken outside money, your life changes. And if you're fortunate enough to come from a very wealthy family or have made a lot of money in your own life and to do your own startup without ever taking a penny, you can make your own decisions without talking to anyone. And there are startups who do this and do very well. But most startups have to take outside money. The moment you do, you have a board. And the question is, what makes a good board? And I found out that I happened to be a pretty damn good board member. And I was sought after by a lot of venture capitalists at the time to join some of their startup boards. And with that, I said, okay, well, if I'm going to do that, I might as well get the rewards of investing as well. And so I decided to be a venture capitalist. What I learned along the way is I hated investing other people's money.
Interesting.
Losing
So,
my
yeah,
own
more about that. Yeah.
is a bad decision. I feel awful about it. I kick myself for it. But it's my own decision, my own money. Okay. Losing somebody else's money and having to look them in the eye and say, I know you entrusted me with your money, but I lost it, was devastating to me. I hated it.
Gary Rubin's kind of alluded to that thing, like he's like, it's my money, I can take my decisions, my deal, right? And it's just my self-accountability, I'll beat myself up, but that next piece, right? And to your then point about, as soon as you take on money as a company, it's a very different place, right? Because now it's not just your company, it's someone else's money.
Yep.
Right?
And, you know, particularly in a bad market,
Yeah.
no matter how good you are, you're never going to be too much better than the mean of the market. So we raised our second fund, and when I started to look at, I'm a data geek if you don't know that about me. I love Excel spreadsheets. I love plotting things out and managing them and trying to figure out where they're going. When I started looking at the economics of small venture funds from the third fund, I concluded I could not look the investors in the eye and say, invest in us, we're going to make you money. I think the venture industry...
As the
and
deal guy,
investment
you couldn't
industry,
say that.
I
That's
could
that's a
not.
big thing. That's a really big thing for you to say that.
So
Yeah.
I decided I'd rather do angel deals than be a venture deal. And the reason is simple. It's arithmetic. Pure arithmetic. It's not big logic. It's not rocket science. But if you look at venture funds today, how many people have not heard of Sequoia or of Excel or Kleiner Perkins or NEA, the top 10? They will make money every fund. They raise $2.5 billion a fund. They're oversubscribed. Why? They're machines. And if you're an entrepreneur and you want to do the next Facebook and you need money, you're not going to come to Dan. You're going to go to Sequoia. You're going to go to Mike Moritz and say, you did Google, you did Airbnb, you did
Uber,
you
Twitter,
Uber.
whatever,
You want to
right?
go
Yeah.
to those guys and get your deal funded if you can.
Yeah.
They fund about 1 out of 10,000. In fact, this is an interesting statistic in the U.S. So how many venture deals get funded in the U.S. every year? Does anybody have a clue? How many? Nope. Way over. It's about 3,000 to 4,000.
What's the total they get? Is there any guess on like what percentage
So
that is?
angels tend to fund about 60,000 deals a year.
So VC gets 3, angels are at 60.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the difference is, and this gets to the arithmetic. So the very
Yeah.
big funds, if you're a partner in a firm with $2.5 billion, you're going to invest it over 4 or 5 years. Let's say 5 because the arithmetic comes out easier.
Sure. Yep.
50 million. Your nut is to invest $500 million over 5 years. How many deals are you going to do a year? 1. How much do you have to invest per deal? The arithmetic says you want a deal where you can put $50 to $100 million in that deal. Would you rather invest $1 million and get 20 back, or would you rather invest $100 million and get, 300 million back? As the VC, 20 million on a $2.5 billion fund doesn't move the needle.
Right. Yeah, it's just not. Right. Yep.
300 million or 500 million moves the needle. Now, as an entrepreneur, would you rather have 10 times your money, 100 times your money, or 3 times your money? So from an entrepreneur's point of view, depending upon how much money you need to take in, how lucky you are, and the valuations you can attract, you're usually better off taking angel money, taking less capital, and getting a quick exit. The sweet spot for exits the last 3 years in the U.S. has been between $20 and $50 million.
Yeah.
So as angels, we look for those deals that are important deals. They're good deals. They're going to make money for us, but make more money for the entrepreneur. I love to go into a deal where we're looking at a $50 million exit, and the entrepreneur team, the founder, walks away with 10.
How do you kind of see where the climate right now is going? There are a bunch of headlines, right, that the unicorns are taking more money and VC is down and angels are down. Like, where do you, the winter of funding is coming, like, how do you
Angels
see
aren't
that?
down so far, by the way.
Okay.
So far.
Yeah.
So
So kind of give us where we're at and where you think it's going to go in the next 6,
how many
12.
how many Game of Thrones fans?
There got to be some. How many Game of Thrones fans? Yep. All right. Yeah.
So winter is coming.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, look, we've seen these cycles before. And the cycle is clear in the reason why, although some of the latest events make me question that logic. In the past, what happens is when equity markets drop,
We're talking about this today. Yeah.
the institutions have a percentage allocation to big capital, to private equity, to bonds, to other things. And the problem is when equity markets drop, their allocation in equity has suddenly become much larger proportionately. So therefore they have to adjust their portfolios to put less into private equity. So the VC funds get less funding and there's less money to go around. The similar effect on angels is that you feel less wealthy when you have a bunch of money in stock and you get your account and look at it and you say, yeah, I'm down 20%. This is in down markets than you do in up markets. When markets are buoyant and prices are high, the deals aren't as good. And the thing I like to say, and I don't have data to support this, but I'm passionate believe it's true. I think the really good entrepreneurs do deals in bad markets. Why? Because if you have a job at Google and the market is up and your stock is going up, and you may leave, but maybe not. If you're passionate about being an entrepreneur, market's irrelevant. But if the
Why
market,
do you say that? Market's relevant because
you
your
gotta
solution.
you gotta go do what you're passionate about. You're not gonna stick around just because you're making money. When markets go down, the people who want to do entrepreneurial things because they just want to make money and they don't have a passion for it, stay at Google. They're looking at it and saying, hey, if I do this startup, it's going to be harder to get it funded. It's not going to have as good of an exit if I look at it today. I'm going to stay at Google for another 2 years, and I'll do this when the market goes back up. But if you're really passionate about what you're doing, you don't care. You're going to go do it. Right? I mean, and so I think that's one of the reasons why when you're in a down market cycle, some of the best companies are found.
Because they're the ones who are still out there.
They're the ones
out.
who are so passionate about it, they're going to make their deal successful.
Yeah.
I mean, look at you had Dan Shapiro here recently,
Yep.
I heard.
Our Dan Dockett, yeah.
Yeah, so Dan's a dear friend. When Dan left his big company job and did his first startup, I was his advisor. And I mean, there was a guy who just had that spark about him. He had to go do this. And his first company was not terribly successful. It was okay, not great. And he did his second company and it was better. But then after his second company, and did he sell it to Google?
Yeah,
Yeah, Google.
That's right.
And he made enough money and he was at Google for a while. He couldn't stay there. He had to go do the next startup. So he left and he's working in his garage and he comes up with the idea for Glowforge. I mean, that's what this is about, right? You love things like that. You love to hear about them. And that's why entrepreneurs do what they do, and it's why angels want to make them successful.
Is that what gets you out of bed in the morning? Like, what gets you up? Like, what are you excited about in the morning from a professional standpoint? Like, what's like?
What gets me out of bed in the morning is the dog having
I was
to
gonna say,
go
or is it the
outside.
dog? That's me too. The dog.
No,
for sure, but-
I mean, my life is more complex right now.
Okay.
On a personal level, I just got engaged, so.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Awesome.
To an entrepreneur, I might add.
Awesome.
And so we do a lot of photography work, and I love doing it. I decided, this is so non-entrepreneurial of me, but I decided to make money in photography as a professional photography right now is insane. The people used to make money in this field very easily because you do stock photography, you do great photos, people would buy it for advertising. Getty made it a little bit worse, but with the internet now and iStock and other things, you can't make money as a stock photographer. So the market for photography has gone to shit in no time. And even the very best photographers are figuring out that they can't really make money at this. So I made the decision, I'm not even going to try to make money at it. I'll do this photography, I'll sell it when I can, I'll donate pictures to charities I care about, Humane Society, the zoo, and other things. And making money at it is secondary. But the angel stuff, I truly am an addict. I keep saying my portfolio's big enough until I get some more exits, I can't invest anymore, and then I go do the next investment. And I don't just do straight up the middle of the fairway kinds of things. I mean,
Do you have a vertical that you like, or an industry, or is it really about team for you?
it's about the people in the team.
Yep.
Every time I say I have a vertical that I like, the next deal I do violates that. so I've learned, don't say it. I think right now virtual reality is really hot, and I'd love to find a deal in VR that I liked. I haven't found one yet. There have been a lot of look, everybody thinks of Seattle and thinks of Microsoft, Amazon. Right now, Seattle's also the hotbed of a whole bunch of consumer products. Not just because of the Amazon effect, but people here are savvy about social networking. It's got a great dynamic for people to begin to think about this. We had Sue Lilly, which was a great exit for people. We've had a bunch of good consumer-oriented deals here. Gary's deal, for example.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you're finding more and more people doing consumer-oriented deals. And I've liked quite a few.
So I love photography, right? So I want to back up to that for a minute. So how did you get into photography? And then, so that one first, how did photography happen?
Well, the way my parents tell the story, when I was about 6 months old, somebody accidentally dropped a camera in the crib, and I picked it up and took a picture. I don't know if that's true, but no, I've always loved it. One of my very early jobs was doing photography for the local newspaper in the rural town I grew up in. When I was in college, I did a ton of photography, showed some, won a couple of awards, continued that into grad school, but I had a decision at one point where I said, do I do photography for a living and do science and technology as a hobby and passion, or do I do it the other way around? And decided that I'd shoot one wedding. And I shot one wedding and said, photography's the hobby. I am not going to make a living shooting weddings and bar mitzvahs and parties and portraits and things. So put it aside for a while, came back to it about 4 or 5 years ago, became very good friends with another Seattleite named Art Wolf, and started traveling with Art, helping him out. In fact, had the only unaccredited photo in his book that was not taken by Art, his last book was taken by me. We went to Tonga and photographed humpback whales, and I got this wonderful picture of Art swimming next to a humpback whale, and he put it in his book.
So tell them the website address, right? 'Cause it's amazing. You have some stunning photos, right? It's gorgeous.
Rosen-photo.com.
Okay. And then tell me, what has photography taught you about entrepreneurship and or angel investing?
I've never really thought about a connection.
No? Do you think there is one? Think about it.
Actually, there have been a couple. There was this Canadian firm that approached me that is doing a photographic service for professional photographers, and I think they're really cool. I gave them some feedback and told them to come back and see me when they implemented it. But in actually the first deal I did with Dan was a photo-oriented deal. But no, I really don't. I try to keep those two parts of my life pretty separate.
Yeah. I love the idea, like, so for me with that, like, whenever someone says they're a photographer, and whether it's iPhoneography or whatever it might be, right, one of my favorite things about being a photographer is I think you walk around the world looking for something beautiful, right? You just kind of have a little bit different idea about looking for what picture do I want to share. And I kind of think in an entrepreneurship way, or as an investor way, or as a startup grind person, when I look out at the audience, like, what's the beautiful thing in the audience, the beautiful business, or the beautiful business model, or the beautiful team? And I love looking at trying to find the beauty in the world, so that's why I was curious about that photography part. I love as soon as I have, my iPhone is so much easier, but I'm different when I have the Canon around my neck, right? And I'm like, oh, I'm looking for something, right? And my awareness is different about what happens in life and the details and the people, and I love that sense of awareness that comes when I have a camera on.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. It leads to two observations. One is that at one point when I was out, I was actually trying to photograph a tiger in India. And we were driving around in this Jeep in this national park, and I found my senses were so highly tuned because it was like around the next corner I might see it, or up in that hill I might spot it. And it made me think about the early history of mankind. And people, we grew up as hunters. And I was thinking, this is the modern form of hunting for me. It's sort of being out there, trying to see that creature, see that beauty. And to your point, recognizing things and scenes, that pattern recognition that other people aren't seeing. I think that does carry over. I think it's a kind of personality that tends to see things that most people don't. And that's a good trait in life, I feel, but certainly for angel investing and photography.
What are you really good at? Like, what are you great at? Your best thing that makes you Dan? What is that?
From a career point of view, one thing that I've always been told is that I can listen to somebody give a technology pitch and in my mind turn it into a business pitch. I can also do the opposite. I can translate in both directions. I think that's not a common skill. I was able in certain companies to convince CEOs of large companies to make fundamental strategic decisions by being able to explain it to them in the terms that they could understand. And then go to a technology team and explain it to them in the terms they understood to get the job done. I think that's why a lot of times people thought I was a good board member, because I could talk finance to the finance guy and technology to the CTO. And I don't get easily bamboozled by either.
You've mentioned it several times tonight about listening, right? Like where did that value come from, and how do you keep getting better at it? And what would you suggest entrepreneurs, like, how do you get better at that skill set, being that seems like it's been something that's so important to you?
Let me, maybe an example or a story.
Yeah, we
would
love
help.
that.
So I was on the board of this company, and the company shipped its first product. Big milestone in any company. The day after they shipped the product, they got a letter from their largest competitor that was from their lawyer, cease and desist, you violated our patents. And the CEO, fabulous CEO, woman, immediately reacted by hiring a lawyer and saying, we haven't violated your patents. And this got into a battle that cost us almost $500,000 we didn't have in legal fees. Cost the other company a comparable amount. And it was going to go to trial. And the lawyer comes into the meeting with us, with the board, and says, you're going to have to raise $3 million to fight this case. And I said, okay, I want to take a pass at this before we spend any more money at all. And rather than go to the CEO of the company, I went straight to the chairman, who put in almost all the money to fund the other company. And I said, this is stupid. We're about to pay lawyers a bunch of money for nothing. What do you really need? And he said, I was waiting for somebody to ask me that question. And he told me what he really wanted. And I said, well, let me think about that. We can't do what you want, but let me come back with a proposal. And in the course of a week, in numerous conversations, sometimes at midnight, we went back and forth and came up with a proposal. And when I told our lawyer what we were going to do, he said, they're never going to agree to that. He said, they're just not going to agree to that. And I said, look, I've been speaking to this guy. This is what he says he wants. You draft it that way. And the lawyer said, no, I've been doing this 25 years. He's never going to agree to that. Their lawyers are going to tell him not to do it. Draft it that way. He drafted it that way. And we signed the deal the next day. And then the lawyer asked if he could hire me to do his negotiations. And I think that the point of this is that sometimes people have an inner dialogue in their mind going that tell them what the answer is. And the best way to become a good listener in a technology company or a startup is to turn off that inner dialogue and make sure you really understand what the other person needs to have. Not what they're saying, but what's behind what they're saying that they need to have. If you can do that, you can do successful negotiations.
All right, so be thinking about questions, audience. My last question for you, then we'll turn it over. What's the one question you wish people would ask you, but they don't? Or do you want to share?
Outside of work and friends and family, what are the important things to you? So, I mean, you all know about photography, you all know about technology, and I'm not going to talk much about my family, but a number of years ago, long time ago, I got adopted by a dog when I was a little kid, and then another one later and another one later. And I think that the human-animal bond is so strong. And I've come to the point of view that the person I really want to be is the person who my dog thinks I am. Because they look at you with these eyes and you just say, I just want to be who you think I am. And so I actually took a lot of time to join the board of the local Humane Society, Seattle Humane. It's become one of my main charities. Also wound up getting involved with College for Veterinary Medicine at Rosen, which is a whole nother story. And trying to support them. We turned Seattle Humane from one of the worst shelters in the country to a no-kill shelter in less than 5 years ago. Really proud of that. So that's the question, I guess, people never ask.
I love that you were adopted by a dog. That was such a great way to say that. That's awesome. Where can people find you? Twitter handle, website. We are talking about photography. Like, how can they find you?
2 websites.
Excuse me.
The Alliance of Angels is always a good way to reach me. I have about 6 emails, 2 Twitter accounts, et cetera, so generally pretty easy to find.
Cool. All right, how about some questions for Dan? Yeah.
Hi there, I'm Shamika. I'm a lawyer and I also work with startups as a mentor. One of the questions that I was puzzled when I was observing some of the startups that I was interacting and as well as helping them get the funding funnel like Hawk, right? I was very interested in finding out what as an experienced angel investor, what do you advise if they are going through the difficulty of the salesmanship? So what I find is every startup has this issue. You know, they get to a certain level, but beyond that, you know, it's about that salesmanship where somewhere they get stuck. And I find that most of the resources that are out there, may they be the angel clubs or the mentors, they have very little help. I'm also an angel investor with Seattle Angels Conference, so I'm kind of, you know, very well aware of the resources that we have. I'd like to hear from your perspective on what are the resources that they could go to learn salesmanship, or like basically, you know, all about, I would say, part of scaling, but it's not about more engineering, but it's more about reaching the right target and maintaining that right momentum and getting to that revenue.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because sales is probably a shorthand for a much broader topic. How do you hit the numbers in your business plan and routinely exceed them? I have to say, on all the startups I've been involved in, there's a handful that have ever really exceeded the numbers they promised their investors at the time the investors invested. So we know that companies will stumble. If you don't, you're being naive. We always tell people, if you want to put X dollars into a company, your first investment should be half X or less, because you know they're going to come back. Almost every deal I look at, this is the only money we'll ever need. And that's why I think Seattle is actually blessed with good lawyers. We have lawyers who really understand the startup process. There's a lot of cities in this country who don't. And people get bad advice on terms and other things. About 5-6 years ago, the market had gotten crazy, and we were getting term sheets that were just stupid, silly term sheets. And I actually took the time to take a bunch of them and aggregate them into an angel term sheet that, as said, that is the simplest, up the middle of the fairway, vanilla term sheet I've ever seen. It's great. and so one thing that a lot of startups make a mistake on when they take money from outsiders is they try to get too clever. I'm sure you would never do this, but a lot of times when startups approach me with valuation, I say, where did you get your valuation from? And they say, my lawyer told me it was the right number. And I said, well, how much money did your lawyer invest? Oh, they're not investing, they're just my lawyer. Well, you know, you should get startup. There's a thing called the HALO report, which is a national report done by the Angel Capital Association, which is a great piece of data done by Rob Wilmot, who's a local guy. I think that when startups hit those hurdles, it's often because the team that they put together to found the company isn't the right team they need to scale the company. If they get to that stage and crash, I blame the board as much as I blame the founding team. It's hard to be a board member at a startup. You fall in love with it. You want to believe it. And the thing I often say is the difference to me between a good board and a bad board is both are going to be the biggest cheerleaders for the company you're ever going to find. But the difference is a bad board member believes the company's marketing more than they believe the numbers. And a good board member believes the numbers more than they believe the marketing. It's very easy to fall into, if you fall in love with a company and you're involved and you're an insider looking out, you're going to want to believe the best. You're going to want to believe that vision you've invested in is going to happen, even if the numbers are telling you it's not. So every company needs to know when to hire new people, when to pivot, when to take other outside advice, and who to take it from. A common mistake that a lot of startups make is they pack their board with people who are industry experts in the field they're pursuing. That's a great advisory board. It's a lousy board of directors. You want maybe one person like that, but mostly what you want are people who are experienced in how to grow a startup. Your board. You want people who will be able to get early warnings that things are going wrong and you need to make a change while you still have cash in the bank to make that change. So from the nature of your question, I mean, this is something that happens all the time. Companies grow. They often say, getting to your first million in revenue is really hard. Getting to your second to get to 10 million is even harder. And growing beyond that is the hardest of all. And it's rare to find a founding CEO who can do all of those things. It's really hard. There are some, but it's really hard. And I think that the conversations investors need to have with CEOs at the time they invest is, okay, how far do you think you can take this company? And if you begin to stumble, how amenable are you going to be to stepping aside and becoming the founder of the company and taking on a functional role and bringing in a CEO who really knows what they're doing?
Should that change be a CEO? Why not a VP of sales? Or
Very well could be, if the CEO will empower and listen to that VP of sales and make the company successful. I have to tell you that there's a syndrome I've seen over and over and over again in startups. And it's, this VP of sales failed, we need a new one 6 months later. That VP of sales failed, we need a new one in 6 months. That VP of sales failed, we need a new one in 6 months. I mean, it's easy when numbers don't come in to blame the VP of sales. There's usually something more fundamental behind that. And it's usually that, you know, the product market fit may not be right, the company may be too early to the market, the competition made a pivot that you didn't expect them to make. There's a number of strategic reasons why your revenue numbers don't materialize. And you got to be pretty sanguine about them. You gotta really take them to heart and look at them with open eyes and an open mind to figure out what went wrong.
Let's go to the back, yeah.
Yeah, so my question is more from an investor point of view. I've worked at a couple startups that have done reasonably well, but I never quite understood, the angel perspective in terms of, so tell me if this has been your experience, and if so, why you keep doing it. That angels that get into kind of high-flying companies, and you mentioned Amazon, oftentimes there's a lot of pressure on the valuations, there's a lot of pressure on funding, and so you start to get heavily diluted, you start to get pushed down in the preference stack, there are pro ratas that you can't finance, etc. And you end up, you probably make more money on a smaller deal than you would on getting 100,000 into Amazon early. Is that true?
Not even close, by the way.
Okay. So maybe it's dependent on the size of the exit, but is that true that angels in successful companies tend to get squashed down, and if so, why do you keep doing it?
Yeah, I mean, the reason yes, the answer is you do get squashed down, but not in all successful companies. In successful companies that require a lot more capital than you planned at the beginning, and that need to take multiple rounds of financing to grow, and decide not to do an IPO when they have the opportunity. The angels the early investors, not just angels, VCs as well, tend to get squashed down. That doesn't mean it's a bad exit. So I'm an A-round investor in a little startup called DocuSign, which filed its S1 to go public 3 years ago, but then had a private offering come up that would give them more money than they were going to raise at the IPO, at a higher valuation than they were going to get on the IPO. They would have been crazy not to take it, they took it. The same thing happened 18 months later. So twice I thought I was finally going to get my check back for this great investment I made, and now it's not. But how can I complain? The valuation I invested in was single-digit millions, and the company's now worth $3 billion. Yes, there's a lot more shares out, but best I can tell, the price per share is well over 10 times what I paid, even with liquidation preferences and things. So yeah, look, you're right, we get squashed down sometimes. Sometimes it's painful. I just had one deal that got acquired, and I got the letter from the banker saying, congratulations, it got acquired, congratulations, your stock is worth zero. Because the last round liquidation preference took in all the cash that the company got.
Did the founders get it?
The founder made nothing. I really hated it. And in fact, I had another deal that I was involved in a number of years ago, where the thing I hated the most about the deal was the board missed an opportunity to be acquired early where the founder would have made a lot of money, took in another round of financing that had preference in front of everybody else, and then sold the company. As an investor, I did fine on it. The founding team got zero out of the deal. I hated it.
Can you expand upon that? I mean, do they get caught up in the, man, if we get this next round of financing, it's gonna take us to the next level where we IPO for
Believing the marketing more than the numbers.
and they just get so caught up, they lose sight of the fact that they just liquidated themselves into nothing?
We had an acquisition opportunity come up that looked like it could have been $20 million. The company had a trailing 12 months revenue of $670,000. Looked like a good deal to me. The chairman of the board, who was an industry expert,
Can you say what
Said-
industry this is?
was biotech,
Okay.
said, I would be insulted by any offer under $50 million. They had a banker. They told the banker not to bring him any offers under 50. You know how many offers they got? Zero. And so then they had to raise another round because they were out of cash. And that round was like 3 or 4 million at a 6 pre with an absolute preference, 2x preference. Founding team got zero. I hated it. I hated that. I think that was really awful because we do this to support founding teams. It was against my advice. I told them, don't take the deals, sell at a lower price now.
Can you
Wait,
explain?
Okay, next.
Yeah,
Kim.
here we go, right here, please.
Hi, can you talk about the first 90 days, right after you made the deal, and the last 90 days, sort of the deal, of a deal you absolutely loved, thought was the most best thing ever?
Oh, sure, that's an easy one. When people ask me the worst deal ever, that's harder. I once got in a lot of trouble by actually citing the company name. It was a deal that I did for Microsoft while I was at Microsoft. And it was a little startup called UUNet, which was venture-backed, and they were the first internet access provider, one of the first. I love the founder. They brought in the founder realized his limitations. He was a great CTO, lousy business guy. They brought in a CEO who became one of my best friends in life, and we bonded. And I did not know at the time when he accepted the deal that I offered that he had another deal from Steve Case at AOL on the table, that he took mine instead.
Wow.
And we did this deal, and I get onto the board, and this was a company that they had a wonderful inside sales team run by a guy who was a genius, and they made their numbers every quarter. They grew like crazy. They redefined the industry. They did an IPO, were worth $3 billion, and then got acquired. The last 90 days, so the first 90 days was board meeting after board meeting, good news, making our numbers, hitting our strategic targets. The last 90 days was more complicated. The market had come down, and they had an unsolicited offer to be acquired. And it was a good offer. And we hired an investment banker who happened to be Goldman Sachs. And they came in with a board book to show us. And I never had one of these like this board book. And they looked at our business plan for the next 5 years and convinced us that if we executed our business plan for the next 5 years exactly as the company was forecasting, it would be worth less than this acquisition offer was today. In good conscience, particularly for a publicly traded company, we had to accept the acquisition. We didn't really want to, but we did. That's what you do.
All right, last question's gonna be Lance.
So now there are celebrity angels, right? Like rock star angels, like rock star chefs. What do you think of, all these shows popping up and this fervor around all this?
I think Sokka might be one that we're talking about, right?
NBC
Yeah.
has a new one that's Tyra Banks is going to be on.
I think that, so I've watched Shark Tank periodically. I think it's great, humorous fun. I think that no angel in their right mind would want to take a controlling interest in the company we invest in. All the time they're saying, I'll take 51% for $200,000. We don't do that. No good angel would do that. We don't want to spend our life running a company. We want to invest in smart people and let them run it. I think that, look, it's hot right now. One of the things that I really love about the Alliance of Angels is we've been around for 20 years. We've seen cycles. We keep investing. We've backed a lot of good startups. We've had startups that go under. Our failure rate is less than the national average by quite a nice margin. I'm proud of that. We're seeing more and more stranded capital in companies in private equity. The unicorns are absorbing a lot of it. But if you look at the number of venture capital dollars in companies that have gotten liquid, it's a very large number, and it continues to grow. I am not optimistic that it makes for good television, and people really are proud of the fact that the entrepreneurial climate in America is alive and well. I think that's good, but there's a certain maturity to getting good deals done. And I've never liked following celebrities into deals, although I wish I'd followed William Shatner into Priceline. He made more money off that than he did off all of his movies and all of his acting career.
Crazy hard to believe, true, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that, celebrities shine a light on this. Another thing I did that I didn't mention was I started and chaired the Angel Capital Association Public Policy Program. And I realized that there's a lot I can do in Seattle to help startups get going. But I asked myself, if I was to change the direction of the American economy, is there anything I can do to help make that so? And I realized by changing Washington, D.C. public policy toward angel investing, there is an opportunity to bring that to the fore. And I did that for 3 years until I just couldn't set foot in Washington, D.C. one more time. I mean, it's reality distortion. It makes reality TV look like nothing. And I think we succeeded on getting people to recognize that startups are the most important thing to keeping the American economy vibrant, and there are certain public policy things, largely regulatory, some financial, that the country could do to make it better. I was one of the authors of the Jobs Act, and I think that was a really positive step forward, although I made some mistakes there that I wish I could take back. But I think that the celebrities draw attention to something that really needs attention. I bet it would surprise people, it certainly surprises politicians when we tell them that, to know that in the state of Washington, over the last 20 years, 100% of net new job growth has come from startups. More than 100%. Because if you think about it, Boeing hires a lot of people, gets tax credits for doing it. Then they do a massive layoff. And then they hire some more people. And then, so if you look at the employment from the big established companies, it's been relatively stable over 20 years. But if you look at where all the growth has come, Amazon, Microsoft, all of the other startups in the community are responsible, and a lot of small businesses that aren't the things that we fund, are responsible for the net new job growth. That's what our economy is going to be based on for our kids and our grandkids and great-grandkids. That's what this country is going to be about, and we have to do the right things to make that so.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dan Rosen.